next week on The Amazing Race. Well, good morning. What's your story? My story is I forgot my batteries. I hope that you've had a good week. I hope that you have come excited and ready to worship and to learn more about God as we continue our series, What's Your Story? If this is your first time with us or you've missed a couple of weeks, here's where we have been and where we're going and where we are. We started out studying, this is a study of the life of Joseph. Joseph was the favored son in his father's house. He was the youngest in his father's house, and he was given rights and privileges and the responsibilities of what a eldest son would have been given. He was put in a management position. He was put over his brothers. His brothers kind of resented him because of that. Joseph was kind of a braggart in that he would tell people what he dreamed and what he thought his dreams meant, and people didn't understand that. And it led to conflict in his family. And Joseph went from being the favored son in his father's house to being turned on by his brothers and being sold into slavery, where he was taken and sold into Egypt and into one of Pharaoh's highest officials, into his house as a servant and slave in Potiphar's house. And he rose in ranks there and was the chief servant in his master's house. And then he was approached by the Potiphar's wife to come. As I said last week, she just kind of gave him that look and said, "Come here, baby." And he said no. And then so she, being the jilted lover, was then inspired to go lie to her husband about Joseph, accused him of trying to attack her and force himself on her. And so Joseph went to prison. Joseph went to prison. He met two people there. He rose in ranks in prison. So he's been in the pit. He's been a slave. He's been in the cell. Now he's risen in ranks in prison. And he interprets the dreams of two of Pharaoh's servants, the baker and the food taster. And he interprets their dreams. And he tells them, listen, when you get out of prison, when you get your positions back, don't forget me. I'm a youth pastor. That's what I do. This is not my thing up here every week. This is not what I do. My job is to minister to students where they're at, get on their level. And one of the things I've told students that I get closest to, I've told this to kid after kid after kid. It's like, listen, when you make it big, when you get famous, don't forget me. Hey, when you win American Idol, don't forget me. When you win The Voice, don't forget me. Hey, listen, when you sign that first NFL contract, all I want is a nice four-wheel drive. Like, just buy me my dream truck. I'll be happy. Like, don't forget me. So far, that hasn't happened. The closest I've come to anybody out of my youth group becoming famous was a few years ago when I got ready to move from Greenville. I was packing up all my stuff, and I was going through. I found one of the original roll books that I had at my very first church. And I flipped through the pages, and I saw some names I recognized. I was like, man. And I saw one, and I stopped. And I just looked at it. I was like, I know that name. And so I went, and I Googled it. And sure enough, it was who I thought it was. See, it was that year, he happened to be a number one draft pick in the NFL. He was a star wide receiver out of Tennessee, and he was drafted in the first round by the Minnesota Vikings. And he had attended my youth group when he was in 7th grade. And I don't have a clue who he was. I don't remember the boy at all. So I know he don't remember me. So that's the closest I've ever come. But maybe you have a situation like that. Maybe you've joked around with people like that, and you've said, listen, don't forget me when you make it big. Don't forget me when you get to where you're going. Help a brother out. Help a sister out. Like, don't forget me. So Joseph tells this guy that, and the guys get out of prison, and what Joseph said was going to happen came true. And in chapter 41, Genesis chapter 41, which is where we'll start today, verse 1, it says, after 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows, and Pharaoh awoke. It goes on to tell us that he fell asleep and had another dream. And so in verse 8 it says, so in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We had a dream on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with his own interpretation. And there was this young Hebrew there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. And when we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And he interpreted to us, and as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. So here we go. 2 long years. Now, Joseph isn't just chilling for 2 whole years. Like, Joseph's still in prison. So he tells these 2 guys, listen, I'm interpreting your dreams. Here's what your dreams mean. One of you is going to die. One of you is going to get your job back. Don't forget me when you get out. And they get out, and they get back. The dreams come true. The cupbearer is sitting there. And for 2 years, Joseph is sitting in prison, forgotten. And then Pharaoh has a dream 2 years later, and he's talking, and no one can interpret it. And the cupbearer says, I love the way the Bible puts it. You know, we always read it so cold and kind of lifeless. I remember my offenses today. I got to think about this guy. He's sitting around. He's like, hey, you know that time you put me in jail? Yeah. You remember that day, that time? There's this dude down there. Out of nowhere. He remembers his time of trouble. How casual was it that all of a sudden he remembers this guy? This young Hebrew who not only interpreted the dreams, but interpreted the dreams correctly. Now, I've been known to have some crazy dreams. I don't think any of them have come true. I hope not. Although this morning I did assault my wife, apparently. She tried to wake me up. Apparently I was having a dream. I grabbed a hold of her and shook her, and I wouldn't let go. And I have absolutely no recollection of that. She got woke up. She was mad at me. She was yelling at me. I was like, what did I do? She's like, you grabbed me. What? So I hope none of my dreams come true. I don't know what I was dreaming, but I hope that doesn't come true. Moral of the story is don't wake Jason up. Or if you do, use a stick. No water gun. The way my dad used to wake us up when we were teenagers, take a pot of coffee, fill it with cold water from the sink, well water, just right on the bed. So here's Pharaoh, and he's had this dream, and it's troubled him. He doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't understand why none of these people, all these magicians, all these wise men, all these people that he's gathered around him to advise him on these mysterious and mystical things. And God, for some reason, God brings up to the mind of the cupbearer at this point, after 2 years. Why can't God have Pharaoh had the dream 2 weeks? Or 2 months? Or 2 days? Why do you have to belabor the point? Here's Joseph in his trial, in his prison cell. And I don't care if you're the top dog in your prison. Being in prison is not fun. Ain't nobody volunteering to go to prison just to hang out. It isn't a resort. And some of you today are here and you feel like you've been in your prison, in your jail, in your confines for far longer than you expected. And you felt trapped, and you've sat at the feet of Jesus, and you have wept, and you have cried, and you said, Jesus, why? Help me get out of this prison. Help me be free. And you wait. Joseph waited. We continue to read through chapter 41, and we are told, my eyes are not working today. In verse 46, Joseph was 30 years old when he finally entered the service of Pharaoh. Now, remember when we started this, Joseph was his father's favored son, and he was 17 years old. And when he enters the service of Pharaoh, he's 30. He waited 13 years to begin to see the beginnings of what God was going to do to fulfill the dreams that he had when he was 17. 13 years. How many of us today will be willing to hear from God and wait 2 years to see the fulfillment of what he's called us to do? How many of us today would wait 2 months, much less 13 years? See, what we have to understand, what we have to be built into our mind is that God's timing is always the right timing. God's timing is always the right timing. You may want answers now. You may want freedom now. You may want fulfillment and understanding now. But what God wants to do is to pursue his plan and you be following him so that he can accomplish his purpose. Because when he does it, it'll be the right time. He's got a purpose. He's got a plan. It unfolds. And you can't rush it. When Tank and Jonathan and I and several others who helped put in these lights and the curtain and all the other stuff, there's a certain way to do that and do it right. And if you just rush through it and don't get all your T's crossed and your I's dotted, your I's crossed and your T's dotted, whatever you do, there could be some big-time problems. You know, the best case scenario is they just don't come on. The lights don't come on. The worst case scenario is they come on and they go bzz, 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 and the place burns down while I'm preaching. That would not be a good sign. You don't rush through. You go through things step by step to make sure everything is done right so there isn't destruction later. God has everything ordered. And if you look at our universe, and I know we live in a world where science wants to constantly tell us that our universe just happened. But if you look at the order of our universe, how meticulously it has been created down to the second that things have to happen, inches the earth could be off its axis and we could see destruction. God is a God of detail. So his timing is the right timing. Always. He's never late. He's never early. It's always perfect. So Joseph is pulled out of prison. Verse 14 of chapter 41. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and he quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Here's the thing. All of you Christians, we have to be willing to submit to the principle that God's timing is always the right timing. But there's a lie that's out there right now in the world of the church. There's a phrase that is misused all the time, and it's a pet peeve of mine. And Joseph illustrates it right here. God's timing is the right timing. And Joseph recognized, he said that Pharaoh said to Joseph, Joseph answered Pharaoh, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Understand this. God's timing is always right, and that God working through you is not the same as God using you. You are not some perfectly crafted tool on the shelf at Sears that is the only tool for the job. You are not some delicate, perfectly engineered tool, machine, that is the only machine that can accomplish the purpose. You are nothing but a vessel that God is allowing to be used so that he can work through. It's not your abilities. It's not your talents. It's not your good looks or your charm. Nothing you have. Because if it's you, then why do we need God? And understand this, that as we read through this, Joseph tells Pharaoh his interpretation. And Pharaoh sees God in Joseph. He doesn't see how great Joseph is. He recognizes that Joseph is being a vessel that God's working through. God is in Joseph. And that's why he winds up trusting him. If you are walking through your life and you are thinking that Jesus and God got this prize, blue ribbon, whatever you think you are, you are sadly mistaken. I have called God the greatest hoarder of all time. Y'all ever watch the show Hoarders? It is the fastest way to get my house clean. Put that on all the TVs, back episodes on Netflix or something. Put it on a loop. Just leave it there. I walk in, I'm like, man, I got to clean this up. My wife walk in, man, I got to clean this up. When kids walk in, ew, I got to clean. Fastest way to get the house clean. But these people on these shows don't understand that their houses are packed full of junk, useless junk. And they'll go out and they'll walk by a yard sale, they'll walk by a dump, and they'll go over and they're like, hey, I need that. I got room for it. I'll fix that later. But God is the greatest hoarder because he doesn't just hoard it. He doesn't just stick it up and say, fix it later. He goes, he gets it off the trash pile. He picks us up off the trash pile and uses us to accomplish something amazing. Joseph was once the favored son, but he, at that point, was down in a pit. It wasn't some traveling prophet. It wasn't some traveling king. It wasn't some traveling magician. It was the guy down in the pit that God chose to use to work through. So don't fool yourself. This phrase, using you, he's using you as a vessel, not as a tool. It doesn't matter if you're metric or standard. It doesn't matter if you're craftsman or whatever the name of the stuff that I bought down here at Advanced Auto Parts that broke the first day I had it. It doesn't matter if you're made in America or made in China. God will use who's willing to step out of the way and let him be present. Too many times we think with what we see, what we hear, what we can sense. We forget that God is the same God that sent Samuel to choose a king, and all the sons of Jesse passed before him. And it was the last one that was chosen. Not because of his achievements, not because of his countenance, not because of his stature, but because he loved God. And he had faith. Joseph waited 13 years. It says in verse 46 that Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly. And he gathered up all the food in these 7 years, which occurred in the land of Egypt, and he put the food in the cities. He put in every city the food from the fields around it. And Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. So Joseph interprets the dream. Basically what he told Pharaoh was that there was going to be 7 years of abundance and then followed by 7 years of famine. And if they weren't careful, the 7 years of famine would consume everything that they had stored over the 7 years of abundance. And Pharaoh says, I need somebody who understands and has discernment, and has God in them. Will you be the top guy to help me manage this? See, Joseph, when he was in the pit, out in the field, he could have given up. When he was in the cage on the way to Egypt, he could have given up. When he was in the Potiphar's house and was being sent to prison, he could have given up. When the cupbearer forgot about him and he was left in the pit, he could have given up. He could have given up long before Pharaoh called him. And notice when Pharaoh called him, it said he pulled him right out of the pit and he shaved and changed his clothes. Listen, he didn't go before Pharaoh and was like, whatever. It's kind of like I am, man. I get out of bed, whatever. What? My son this morning, that was what he was like. What? No, he got himself fixed up, presentable, to stand before Pharaoh. He hadn't given up. He was ready for God to be working through him. Are you ready? See, Joseph had learned this principle that we must learn. We must learn to wait. Waiting isn't easy. I don't like waiting. But we must learn to wait. We must learn to wait. There we go. I hate waiting. I don't like waiting rooms. It's one of the reasons I don't go to the doctor. I don't like waiting. I would rather bleed to death than have to rush myself to an ER. When I got knocked down out here in the basketball court and busted my head open, I was like, do I really have to go to the ER? Not because I didn't want to get fixed, but it's because I didn't want to sit in the waiting room for 3 hours. I hate to wait. Yeah, she made me. I hate to wait. I'll be standing in line. My son can tell you this. I was standing in line at Kroger one day, and doing the self-checkout. By the way, if you're an introvert, self-checkout's where it's at, because you don't talk to nobody. My wife and I were having that discussion this week. It's like, she said, I used to go to Walmart. So I'm going to stop going because every time I go, there's self-checkouts down. That means I have to talk to people. I'm just not going to do that. Introverts unite separately in your own homes. I remember being in Kroger with my son, and the self-checkout said, cashier has been alerted to assist you. Cashier has been alerted to assist you. Cashier has been, and I stood there and it's waited. And the cashier walked the other direction. And I'm and she walked back. She talked to somebody and walked away again. So I walked out because I wasn't waiting anymore. I go get my Pop-Tart somewhere else. I hate to wait. And I hate waiting on God because you can't wait on God. Waiting on God, you can't yell at him. You can't walk out on God. You just you can yell at him, but it ain't going to do nothing. He's not going to come down and all right, I hear you, Jason. I'll hurry up. No, he's not going to do that. I'm at a point now in my spiritual walk where I no longer doubt that God's going to do something. I no longer, I do complain. I no longer wonder if he's going to do what he said he's going to do. I'm at a point now where the only doubts I have are about myself and my understanding of him. Did I really understand that right, or am I really doing the right thing? But most of the time when I'm waiting on God, my thing is this. God, I know you got a plan. God, I know you got something happening for me, and you got something that you're going to do with me. I just don't know when it's going to happen and how it's going to happen, and I don't like waiting. I know you got a plan. I just don't like it. It's not fast enough. But here's the thing. When we go and try to get around God and make stuff happen that isn't supposed to happen, we aren't ready for, bad things happen. I'm a youth minister. By the way, I'm a youth minister, if I haven't said that yet. Guess where I see this principle played out the most? Teenage romance. I've got to find a boyfriend. God isn't sending me one. But this guy's kind of good guy. He looks good. He's sweet. He's kind of fun. I don't know if he likes Jesus, but I'll get him there. Or vice versa. The guy, I really want a girlfriend. I want to be alone. I want to have a girlfriend. And she's kind of cute, and she don't go to church. She's like a Mormon or something, but what's the big deal? I speak from personal experience. And we wind up getting ourselves in trouble. And I see this time and time again with our teenagers because they're not willing to wait for God to bring someone in their life that embodies the character of Jesus. And I could tell you, I know this because I was that kid that I was willing. I wanted a girlfriend. I didn't care. I just wanted a girlfriend. And I was willing to date anybody. No one would date me, but when I finally tricked one into going out with me, she was the right one. Really? Jeez. No. Oh. Well, I did assault her this morning, so we must learn to wait. The best things happen when we wait on God. God's timing is always the right timing. Here's what I love. Pharaoh called Joseph. He told him the dream. Verse 25, then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed what he is about to do. Now what's about to happen, not what you're about to experience, not what your country's going to, no, God has revealed. God himself has revealed what he's going to do. And do you know what happened? They had 7 years of plenty. Exactly 7 years of plenty. Just like the dream said. And then they had 7 years of famine. Just like the dream said. Not 6.5 years. Not 5 years and 11 months. 7 years. God works. And when he works, he leaves no doubt. See, Joseph could have kind of interpreted that and said, well, the 7 cows mean this and 7 cows mean that. And it could have been like 6.5 years or 4.5 years or 5.5 years and then 3.5 years of famine. But no, it was 7 years. And I guarantee you one thing. If Joseph had said that and there had been 5.5 years of plenty, 6.5 years of plenty, and then 4 years of famine, no one would have said anything. Everybody would have been fine with that. They wouldn't have batted an eye. But it wouldn't have proved that God was who he said he was. It wouldn't prove that he was all-knowing. And more importantly, it wouldn't prove that God was the one working through Joseph and not Joseph himself. The reason we wait on God, the reason we bring it all together with God is because when he does the work, there's no doubt who's in control and who's running the show. Y'all listening too slow? Sometimes when we see in church and we see in the world and we see people doing things in the name of Jesus, sometimes we have to wonder, take a step back and look, is that really God or is that really them? I'm going to be honest with you. I could say this without a doubt. You can go back and ask people who knew me. That the fact that I'm in ministry doing what I do is pure testament to God working through somebody. Because one of my strengths that people have told me since I started out in youth ministry, since I was 17 years old, 18 years old, was, Jason, man, you really relate to those kids really well. Listen, y'all, I didn't relate to teenagers when I was a teenager. I don't know how that happened. I didn't understand teenagers when I was one. But now all of a sudden I understand them and I relate real well to them. I didn't do that. It just happened. God did it. People come to me, Jason, you do such a good job speaking. I haven't been to seminary. I went to Bible college online, so I never been in a classroom. I didn't have an instructor break down my preaching and tell me all the things I'm doing wrong. I just open the Bible and say, God, what do you want me to tell people? What are you saying in this passage? What do you want me to speak about? People say, Jason, you did such a good job. I really like that point. Corey, the other day, I said it. She was, every once in a while, she'd been quoting stuff from my messages, and I look at it, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's a pretty cool quote. And I'm like, that's good, I didn't even remember that. And I realized I'm the one that said it. I won't remember what I said in this room when I walk out the door. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I say that jokingly, but what I mean is that I don't let myself get in the way of God's word. And if I do, that's on me, and I apologize. But my goal is to let God's word speak for itself and God to speak through me so that when God begins to work, there's no doubt that it's him. Last 2 points, we're going to go real quick. Joseph rose through the ranks. He became successful. I want you to understand that as his story begins this climb, that God is not concerned with your achievements. God is not concerned with your achievements. God did not bring Joseph up out of the pit because he was concerned about Joseph being successful. The temptation as we read this story is that we apply it directly to us, that God wants to bring us up out of the pit and make us strong and powerful. That's not what this story is saying. This story is illustrating that Joseph was used by God, and God worked through Joseph to accomplish his purpose. And even when he was in the pit, God was still planning to put him at the top. So wherever you are, God's still planning to use you, whether you're at the top or you're in the pit. And I don't know where in between you'll fall, because God's not concerned with your achievement. He's concerned with his plan. So if you go home today and you think, well, God's going to get me out of this pit and make me powerful and strong, you're missing the point. Because here's the ultimate truth, and I said this in the first message, and our final point. Your success isn't for you. Your success, Corey, you don't have to come back up yet, because we're going to do something different today. Your success isn't for you. Joseph's success was not so we would talk about Joseph. Joseph's success was so that Israel could survive and be born a nation and God's chosen people. And what I said in the first message, if it wasn't for Joseph going into the pit and being pulled out into Egypt, the rest of the Bible would have never happened. Because if Joseph hadn't been there to interpret the dream, he would have never been appointed to oversee the gathering of the food. If the food had never been gathered, then there would never be resources for the famine. If there hadn't been resources for the famine, there wouldn't be anywhere to go to get resources. If Joseph hadn't been there in his seat when his family came in to buy food, they wouldn't have gotten any food, probably. And they would have starved and died, and the nation of Israel would never happen. 13 chapters, 37 through 50, sets the stage so that the entire Bible could be accomplished. Joseph's success wasn't about him. It was about God's plan. Your pit, your success, whatever it is, isn't about you. So if you're going home praying, God, I just want to be successful so I can have a nice, shiny red convertible, or I can have this nice, big new house, or I can do this, or I can do that, or I can have my name on a book, or I can be doing all this famous stuff and make all this money and do all this stuff for my kids and my family. Then you're praying the wrong prayer. Your prayer should be this: God, work through me, not my will, but yours be done. And when you find yourself there, when you find yourself in the middle of God's will, whether you're in the pit or you're on the throne, you will know that your story means something.